You're listening to a 3CR podcast created in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
In the past I gathered in tribes, village to village chanting rhymes, gree-ups and town criers, lolly drums inside, spreading the messages orally, enhanced with beat, hip-hop, sonically, from Fiji to Sydney to New York City, rocking every turf I step on. I learn from, I burn some, I move on with my song, a student of life, mapping my own form, my own dorm, so scrap the norm, rewrite, reunite, do not give up the fight, whatever it may be for you may not be the same for me, may not be the same for me, though. Do you know where you're going to? Do you know exactly what you're gonna do when you get there? Prepare for your welfare and all that you care for may disappear if you're not careful. Be mindful of karma, like
where nature is harsh and demanding, where only the quick and the strong and the deadly can survive. This place is no place for civilized man.
I want my land.
Kick it in the guts, Barry.
Far away from my
All you've got to do now is pass the Australian culture test. 3 simple questions, 3 correct answers, and you go through that doorway to the greatest little country in the world.
The grass is made of yards of highly
Good morning, everybody. This is Annie for Showreel, and there's a few technical issues going on here at 3CR today, but we're still bringing you all the best stuff. And today we're going to be talking about something that's really fascinating for people out there in the Australian film industry. The screen industry, as it's been updated, given all the different areas that visuals are now being projected from. Screenrights, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about Screenrights Cultural Fund. Screenrights is an organisation that collects secondary royalties in Australia, New Zealand and around the world, and they're in the process of offering their cultural fund, which supports innovative new initiatives that foster the creation and appreciation of screen content in Australia and New Zealand, with up to $50,000 funding available per project. Now, this year, 2023, is a focus on new visions, and the applications opened in February and they close Wednesday, 12th of April. But we've got Sarah Steele from Screenrights, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about it. I started off asking Sarah about what Screenrights does.
The primary purpose of Screenrights was we were set up to administer secondary royalty payments to rights holders in broadcast content. So it's a bit of a long and checkered history, but it's not checkered at all. We originally, teachers were copying VHS tapes of shows from TV and showing them to their classes, and there was no copyright remuneration for the rights holders in that content. So Screenrights was set up to track, to license that usage and to track the payments so that we could pay those royalties back to screen content creators.
The reason why we're talking today is because of Screenrights Cultural Fund, and I presume that there's a certain amount of funding flow through to be able to run a cultural fund.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, we're dealing in kind of millions of dollars, I think around 40 million odd for the educational license. And so we have a capacity to be able to allocate a small amount of some of that money towards a cultural fund, which we started up in 2018. So it's in its 6th year, and we're really happy to be able to use some of that money to put towards some amazing initiatives that benefit the screen industry as a whole, because everything we do, we want to help create a thriving screen industry. So to give you a bit of a background about the Cultural Fund and the types of projects it funds, the way that it differs from a lot of the other funding in the market is that it's not a production or a development fund, so it's not to put towards specific screen projects, as in screen content creation, but it goes towards projects that help to, broaden access to screen content or to diversify the voices in screen. These kinds of initiatives that offer a real broad benefit to the industry. So we're trying to offer a fund in the landscape that doesn't duplicate what's already provided by the state and federal funding bodies. So this year, the focus of the 2023 Screenrights Cultural Fund round is new visions. And I'll just I'll let you know what our board director, Rachel Anthony, who's the chair of the Cultural Fund Working Group, had to say about that. She explained it as new visions aim to let us see something differently. Perhaps it's a reimagining of creative processes, an innovative way to connect with audiences, or a project which destroys stereotypes, or perhaps all of these. She says, every year we're thrilled to see the calibre and breadth of applications and how they interpret the theme. We encourage all the visionaries out there to submit.
And I notice Back to Back, for example, which is well known here because it's a Geelong theatre company that has really punched up above its weight, but it then it went on to create some of their theatre productions on screen, which was supported by development money from the Cultural Fund. It wasn't to develop it, but to actually make it possible for them to move into the screen.
Yeah, they're amazing, that theatre company.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good example of a project which did have a screen production kind of at its core. But what Back to Back Theatre were doing with this grant money was that they were creating an internship model that could be used on other productions so that it could see people with disability employed and mentored in production roles. So while it was attached to the creation of a production, a screen production, it was actually much more about the model that they were then able to provide to industry so that it can have like a much broader impact than just that one project. It's trying to find projects that really can help the industry to thrive in all kinds of ways, which is why, we're really open to the kinds of projects that we're looking to fund. And it's sort of like it's a pretty difficult thing to explain, but once you get your head around what we're trying to do, it's pretty straightforward. So I would recommend anyone who's interested in applying just to pop over to the Screenrights website and check out the previously funded projects, because you can see all the different kinds of things that we funded since 2018, and it's kind of, anything from like a geodesic dome that toured schools in New Zealand with screen content to increase access, to a screenwriting mentorship program for Aboriginal community members in the Kimberley. Like, there's a huge breadth of projects that we fund. It's currently open for applications and closes on Wednesday the 12th of April. You can apply for up to $50,000 per project, and that can be part of a project which has bigger funding and other funding streams from elsewhere, or has in-kind support that's going to make up a bit more. But we do fund less than that as well on smaller projects. We want to see all kinds of projects come through. And one thing I'd love to share with your listeners is that we have a process that was implemented last year for the first time, which is an expressions of interest process. And the way that works is we really want to help individuals and organisations who perhaps aren't as familiar with grant funding applications and could use a bit of advice and assistance on making sure that their application really shines, because we know that there are amazing projects out there from people who just maybe haven't had the experience with grant funding. So you can pop in an expression of interest. It's a really simple form just with a few details about the project. That's open until the 31st of March, but those are rolling. So what would happen is our EOI consultant, who is external to Screenrights, she'll just hop in a video session at a time that's convenient for you both and really work through your idea with you and really help you to hone that application so that it can be the best possible application for the process. And that's open until the 31st of March, which then gives you another couple of weeks after that to actually put the application together after you get that advice. I can't wait to see the applications that come in. We just have so many amazing projects that come through, and it's just honestly one of my favourite parts of my job.
And that's Sarah Steele. She's from Screenrights, and she was talking about their Screenrights Cultural Fund. And it's, as she was saying, not purely for developing a a project to screen. It's a far more about the underwear of the screen industry. And we had the opportunity to talk to Lena Nablus. She's from Diversity Australia, Arts Australia. Now, Lena tells us a little bit more about how this funding from the Screenrights Cultural Fund worked for them. First up, I asked her about what Diversity Arts Australia does. Thanks very much, Lena Nablus, for coming onto the show. You're the CEO of Diversity Arts Australia, and I'd really love it if you could tell my listeners who you are, Diversity Arts Australia.
Yeah, so Diversity Arts Australia is the national voice for ethno-cultural and migrant racial equity in the arts, screen and creative sectors. So we basically kind of work through advocacy, research, facilitating conversations and connections, seminars, symposia, internships, traineeships, those kinds of things as well. And we also do strategic projects.
Okay, and I noticed that one of your big helpful things for the screen industry and the cultural industries across the board in Australia was a report that you did in 2018 called Shifting the Balance, which actually got some proper data instead of people just pontificating.
Yeah, so that was a really big deal. So we did that Shifting the Balance report, which was looking at cultural diversity or cultural and linguistic diversity in leadership within the Australian arts, screen and creative sectors. You're right, the data's from 2018, but we released the report in 2019. It was really quite an important report.
Well, the thing about it is that depending on the makeup of the leadership in the cultural industries, they form a gatekeeper role, in a sense, to funding and the development of the diverse groups of people who want to express themselves.
That's right. So we looked at 1,980 people in leadership roles to determine, you know, their kind of cultural background and their ethnicity. We looked at nearly 2,000 people across 200 of Australia's leading arts, screen and creative organisations, and we found that on average 9% of people from, you know, what is called culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and we've used the ABS kind of definition. So we actually looked at first, second, and third generation. So quite broad, but only 9% there was only 9% average of people from culturally diverse backgrounds in any kind of leadership role in the industry, and that is us being, you know, at the time 39% of the population, people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, and probably higher when the new census data is all kind of collated and comes out. So it's pretty alarming, and half of the organisations that we surveyed basically had absolutely no one in any leadership roles who was from a culturally and linguistically diverse background. And like you said, leaders are really critical because they really do impact decision-making and priorities, agendas. Like you said, they gatekeep and they really shape the culture of an organisation. They decide who gets employed, what films are going to be made, you know, all of that kind of thing. So I think we wanted to start with that, and we were kind of starting as well in response to, and sometimes including from the screen industry, the challenge that people have set to us, which is you can't prove that.
Yeah, that's
right. You can't prove that, you know, even though we knew it, we had that kind of lived experience. A lot of the people we worked with had been, you know, reporting their experiences of exclusion, and so we wanted to start there with leadership because we thought that's a really critical area, and that's an area that we can measure.
Yeah, it's quite clever. I mean, it's like that old furphy about women just aren't good enough, and that's the reason for why they're not getting leadership roles. I mean, it's just a load of rubbish, really.
Yeah, so one of the questions that one of the journos asked after we released the report was, why aren't people applying for the jobs? And so it's the same thing. And I was a bit, what's the word, I don't know, just a bit taken off guard by that question. I was kind of like, no, it's not that people aren't applying, it's that they're being locked out of these roles, just in the same way that women have been locked out of, you know, a lot of areas of the industry for a very long time. And it's not because the talent's not there. It's because people hit a ceiling and they're not kind of able to go any further. And I think, I've spoken to, filmmakers who've said, I don't know how many more times I can be mentored or how many more times I can be an attachment. Like, I'm like in my mid-30s now, or, it's time. But there's got to be those opportunities that are open to them, and to support them to those leadership pathways or other areas of the industry.
Oh, well, of course, it's also about, what do people think are important stories to tell? And having people of a specific background choosing what's going to be shown and how people are going to be shown melds the entire culture of a country. We've got a responsibility, don't we?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we do. We definitely do. And it's really, important that there are people with lived experience, with a diverse kind of amount of lived experience across the industry who are involved in deciding what stories get told and also directing and producing those stories that are told. Our friends at Media Diversity Australia released a report called Who Gets to Tell Australian Stories. They were looking at people who were news readers and, people kind of, I guess, in broadcasting kind of roles, and something like 75% were from Anglo-Celtic backgrounds. So that's not quite the same, I guess, as as someone just in the screen industry, because they were looking across kind of broadcasting as well as screen. But it's still very telling, I think. It's like 75% of people are from one particular background, and I know that there's a lot of complexity within Anglo and Celtic backgrounds, but it's still excluding a lot of the population, a significant amount of the population, and it's disproportionately high compared to Anglo and Celtic representation in the population.
Oh, it's also about power dynamics and what's considered to be important. It's interesting. I did an interview with Beck Cole, who has made, who's part of the crew of people who made We Are Still Here, and there's a sequence in that film where that was contributed by Samoans. And there's a sequence in it where the fellow who's an Anzac soldier he's a Samoan. Who would have thought that poor old Samoans were at Anzac as well, because it's a personal story. He's eating this horrible spam from a can and he throws it away. And Beck said, perhaps we could leave that out because, we want to tighten it up. And they said, no, because it's really important, because when the colonial powers came to our countries, they got rid of our ability to actually feed ourselves locally and made us eat this horrible food. So it was incredibly important and symbolic to them to leave that piece in. But she didn't know that.
That's awesome. That's really important, and it's important that she listened and left it in, because I think sometimes you do hear stories where people are, particularly like if you're talking about people who end up playing a cultural consultant kind of role on a film, and they, sometimes there's kind of stories about how people who don't have lived experience are picking and choosing what sections of the story are the most relevant, and in that process kind of deleting or editing out those really important stories that, like, I guess in Beck's case, she found out about that actually that was really symbolic of colonisation and the impact that it had on people having control over their own land and production of food. That's a really awesome story. And
let's get on to this other thing, which is that Diversity Arts Australia has fed into the Screenrights Cultural Fund. They've funded Fair Play on Screen. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So the Fair Play on Screen program is really focused on strengthening the screen industry, particularly in the area of cultural and racial equity in terms of people from culturally diverse, people of colour, migrant and refugee backgrounds. But the program also, there were 13 masterclasses, and it took an intersectional approach and also included masterclasses that were led by First Nations people and people with disability or disabled people as well. So it was really about strengthening the screen industry in terms of its equity and inclusion goals by providing a series of masterclasses that provided really actionable and practical strategies for organisations and companies to make change, because particularly for small to medium green organisations and businesses, they don't often have access to this training, but we know that there is a desire to make change in, the areas that they work in, and to kind of think more and act more in terms of equity and inclusion and anti-racism, and that was the aim of the project. And initially we were going to work a lot more intimately with fewer organisations, but of course, COVID and the floods and all of the things that have happened over the last few years meant that we ended up being quite flexible, responding to what the people in the industry were telling us, and developing it as a series of 13 masterclasses that were also kind of available on demand afterwards for people who might not be able to make it. It was a tough time for the industry, but it was an amazing program, and we had over 280 participants and a lot of organisations.
So when you say that, are you saying like the production managers and people like that from different places would have involved themselves in this?
Yeah, we had people from all over the industry. We had people from Seesaw Films, from Screen West, from Laundry Lane, from different film festivals. We had some of the, service organisations like CineWest and Documentary Australia. So we had a real diversity of people attending in all different roles in the industry.
So the intention is very open-hearted. They really want to have a more diverse industry.
That's right. Yeah, I think that people do. And so the sessions were structured to be really relevant and practical. So there were sessions like, how do you, act as a director in an inclusive way? So like inclusive directing, or how to be anti-racist in the screen industry, and what that looks like. Trying to think cultural safety. We had a few sessions on cultural safety, on accessibility, but everything was tailored to the screen industry. We also had a pretty awesome session with Deborah Williams, who is from the UK's Creative Diversity Network, which is a screen-based peak organisation over there, and she has lived experience as someone who's a black woman and disabled and extensive experience in the screen industry. So she also, talked about towards an inclusive screen sector. So each of the sessions was really structured to be relevant to the industry and to be supporting people. And then we had those more, even more practical sessions about how do you put together an equity action plan, or whatever people might call it. But so we also had sessions like that.
All right. And are you seeing any outcomes, positive outcomes from this, or is it too soon to see?
Well, immediately afterwards and during, we had an awful lot of positive feedback. The program didn't finish that long ago, so we will be doing like a follow-up in 6 months, and we'll be doing another, we'll be doing follow-ups in terms of evaluation and seeing what the longer-term effects of it are. We've had heaps of feedback. One thing that was really surprising was that we actually had a lot of people with lived experience, like people of colour, disabled people, attended the masterclasses. Some of those people we actually knew were very knowledgeable and very experienced in the subject area, and we were interested to know what brought them in. We were so happy they were there because it made the conversation so much more richer and deeper. And they were saying that a lot of them have experienced a lack of cultural safety or marginalisation within the sector, but being able to be in a space where this is talked about openly and be able to have, be able to articulate that in this kind of collective way was actually quite empowering for them. That's a pretty cool outcome.
Yeah.
People told us that they really felt like they had learned some practical skills in terms of, how to attract more diversity in their workforce, that they were going to implement those, think more about things, listen more, reflect more, and also look at how they could extend, the kind of cultural safety frameworks to the work that they were doing. So there was lots of feedback like that.
I mean, considering that people from diverse backgrounds, culturally and linguistically, without even thinking about disability, make up 40% of the population. I mean, it's the norm. It's ordinary. It's the world.
Yeah, and that's why it's every day, but it's always so surprising and a little bit shocking when the underrepresentation is, well, let's just say the overrepresentation of some groups. And it's along class lines as well. It's not just along race lines. Yeah.
Yeah, it's along all of those lines. It's a bit like that. It's not, when you said what you just said, it's like it's not a black problem. It's actually a white problem.
Yeah, I think so. And so, yeah, I like that. And I like what you said earlier about power, because it is about power and it is about, challenging that and, taking back some of that power.
How much funding were you able to get from the Screenrights Cultural Fund for this? Because it sounds pretty ambitious.
Yeah, it was very ambitious. We got $25,000.
Good.
And so we were really happy with that. That's what we asked for. And then we kind of matched, funding for that. But it really was like such an awesome pilot because, what I really appreciated, Screenrights were really there supporting us when we needed to adapt the program. They supported us the whole way through. But also it's super hard to get funding for this kind of work, which is not, making a film, supporting the industry, I guess in quite a deep way that can lead to some really significant changes in the way films are made and the kinds of films that are made in the industry. So just their vision in supporting us was really critical, and it also was super successful. So as a result, we've been developing kind of online training offerings that we can also provide on demand, and we'll be also trying to continue it and looking at other, sponsors and avenues to be able to do this every few years, like as a live thing, and then also having some online training. Because the thing is with all industries in the creative industries, there's always high turnover, and also things shift, language shifts, ideas shift, and so this kind of work, there's no end point. It's ongoing. It's like ongoing learning that we all need to do. I always tell my kids when I was at uni it was really radical to change he to she. They're really outraged by that because they say that's just really binary, Mum. I'm like, yeah. So, like things are always developing and, shifting. So we need to, so being able to provide this ongoing and seeing it as something that it is ongoing, it's ongoing learning, and we all need to continue to do it.
And that's the end of the program. We've just been listening to Lena Nablos. She's from Diversity Arts Australia. Fascinating stuff. And they were the recipient of funding from the Screenrights Cultural Fund. Earlier we were hearing from Sarah Steele about the Screenrights Cultural Fund. If you're interested, you should go to their website. The closing date is April the 12th, and also there's opportunities for people to brush up their skills towards putting an application in. So be alert to that when you go online to find out more about it. As I said, that's the end of the program. We're going to go out with a song I'm absolutely in love with.
I don't speak my father's native tongue. I was born under a southern sun. I don't know where I belong. I don't know where I belong. My great-granddaddy was Wiradjuri. My father came here from the Philippines. It's where I live, it's where I want to be. Ooh, but you make me feel so ill at ease. I don't speak my father's native tongue. I was born under
You've been listening to a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. For more information, go to allthews.3cr.org.au.